Before we actually get into the using schedules with a team arrangement, I do want to kind of just talk about schedules in general for a few minutes, because I want us to all be on the same page. I want us to understand schedules from the same perspective, because it's not grandma's program anymore. I'm telling you, schedules has been modernized. Schedules are certainly a tool for 1102s in the workplace, contracting professionals that work for the federal government, whether you're DOD or in a civilian agency. Now, in addition to that, I would say that this session, if some of you are vendors, if you're contractors that are with us and you are a schedule holder, there is going to be nuance to this that may be something you can use in the marketing of your schedule to those federal customers that you seek to do business with. So I want you to think about it from a perspective in both ways, because it is another aspect of schedules that's not commonly known. And the biggest reason that it's not commonly known is that within the directive of FAR, within the regulations, the Federal Acquisition Regulations, and when it comes to 8.4, subpart 8.4, where the rules for schedules are found, there is nothing there. There is nothing there. But it is a methodology that is capable to be used and is used on a regular basis by many, many agencies. All right, let's talk about schedules a little bit. And when we talk about schedules, I'm talking about the GSA Multiple Award Schedules program. All right, and so I've got several learning objectives I want to give to you today. And for the first one really is to just talk about the schedules program and how it's set up and so forth, so we have a general understanding. Then I want to talk about using the schedules program for contractor team arrangements, not teaming, but contractor team arrangements. There's a uniqueness to this methodology that, as I say, is just with schedule holders. And when we talk about that, you know, there is other uniquenesses and capabilities of the schedules program that are pretty cool, if you will, like schedule BPAs. And in the room next door, in the next session, I'm going to talk about using schedules and setting up schedule BPAs as opposed to open market BPAs. Schedules are a contract vehicle. If I were to say to you as an 1102 working in the government procurement arena, and I would say, tell me all the methodologies of contracting that you can think about that are in the FAR, everybody would say, ooh, FAR Part 12, commercial contracting, FAR Part 13, simplified acquisitions, FAR Part 14, sealed bidding, FAR Part 15, negotiated procurements. Nobody ever says FAR subpart 8.4. They don't talk about 8.4 as a methodology of procurement, but if you think about it, it really is, because it sets forth the processes for using schedules as a vehicle for you in your acquisition place. And so when we talk about schedules, I'm talking about an IDIQ type contract. GSA as an agency, if you will, sets up these vehicles, these contracts, these IDIQs from a contract level. It is a contract vehicle that we use from a contract level. GSA owns the vehicle, GSA administers the vehicle, and we manage it overall. But we let user agencies, and that's the entire federal government, use them as if they own them themselves. And so you, at a user level, have the capability of using our IDIQ as if it was yours. And so we call them the GSA Schedules Program. We call it the Multiple Award Schedules Program. We use the acronym MAS. I've even heard some people call it GSA numbers. I kind of wonder about that at times. The FAR refers to it frequently as the Federal Supply Schedules Program. And so it goes by different names, but there really is only one program. And so when we speak about it, and so when we talk about that, there are standing solicitations in FedBizOps. And I'm saying from the contract level, where contractors can enter into the program at any time. They can answer that solicitation and enter in and become a schedule holder. It's not an overnight process. It does take a period of time for them to do such. If you are a schedule holder as a contractor here in this room, you certainly know that. But you have that capability to come in. But I wouldn't want users, and I'm talking about federal agencies physically that use the vehicle, to think that they have to post their requirements in FedBizOps, because you don't. That's an exception to the program. So if you're at the user level from the federal side, you're not going to post your requirements in FedBizOps. The only time you would ever use FedBizOps in a schedule spy is if you were using a limited source justification, an LSJ, which would be you're going to buy something off of schedules and you're going to do it sole source. And so you've got a legitimate sole source requirement. You're then required to use FedBizOpps as a post-award announcement for within 14 days of the buy. And then your announcement has to stay in FedBizOpps for 30 days. All right, but never any pre-award announcements. And so when GSA at the contract level actually awards these vehicles, we physically award them using FAR Part 12. It's for commercial product and services. And so physically speaking, FAR Part 12 is for large dollar commercial buys. And so we, understanding the processes and the normal clauses and provisions, the terms and conditions that are going to be within a FAR Part 12 solicitation is knowledgeable for you. Now, when we award these IDIQs, they're a little different than those open market ones that you do at your agency. At your agency, you're probably accustomed to a 1 year with up to 4 option year IDIQ. Ours have a 5-year initial period with 3 5-year options. And we're in this program not only with GSA, and there are 39 schedules, by the way. 30 of them are owned and managed by GSA, and 9 of them are owned and managed by the VA. The VA schedules all cover medical elements like medical supplies, medical services, medical equipment. There's even a schedule for prescription drugs. The VA sets them up just a tad bit differently than GSA. In the GSA world, they are established from a standpoint of an initial 5-year with 3 5-year options. VA does an initial 5-year with only 1 5-year option. But we set them and award them at the contract level with fixed price economic price adjustment contracts, meaning that the contract can be adjusted during its performance period based on that economic price adjustment clause. Now, we have fair and reasonable pricing. You will find that, that in our pricing there is a price established at the contract level, but you can always seek a discount off of schedules. In fact, I would say to you that when the contracting officers award these schedule prices at the contract level, there is an understanding that there is every what if that there could be. There is every circumstance that that contractor could encounter based on the pricing that they give. But when you at the user level start establishing your requirement and giving it to the contractor to give a quote on, they're going to give you their best price based on your circumstance, which is not necessarily going to be in line with all the what ifs that they priced at GSA. Contractors can always reduce their price, but they can never go above what their schedule price is. And the truth of the matter is that if your requirement is above the simplified acquisition threshold of $150,000, you're mandated by 8.4 to ask for or seek a price reduction. Now, GSA says always seek a price reduction. In fact, we are encouraged by the folks in DOD, DPAP particularly, to teach that to our DOD counterparts, to seek a price reduction as a part of the processes, if you will. All right, but when it comes to the performance, the element of your requirement, we leave that up to you. In fact, I say to you, I'm talking about the federal customer who has the requirement, and you're going to marry that to the appropriate schedule that you have. Everybody that deals with federal procurement, whether you're a contractor or whether you're on the government side, you have to understand the FAR. So 8.4 is where the rules are in regards to how to use schedules. If FAR Part 12 is the part of FAR that the contract or the IDIQ is awarded, we've already established that. But something that's very important, the FAR came about on April the 1st of 1984 based upon a statute that came about on the same date. That statute goes by the acronym CICA, and we're talking about the Competition and Contracting Act. All right, and so the Competition and Contracting Act is kind of the focus of competition is in FAR Part 6. And if 6.102 Delta 3 describes, if you will, that schedules as a program is a method that is compliant with as a competitive procedure. And so CICA is not a question when it comes to using schedules. There are parts of FAR that are not applicable to schedules. FAR Part 13, Simplified Acquisition, we say is not applicable to schedules with this exception. That is bundling. All right, excuse me, wrong part of FAR, except with multiple award BPA schedules, blanket purchase agreements. Let me get my mouth and my mind in gear here for just a moment. All right, and so FAR Part 13 is not applicable to schedule buys with the exception of BPAs. Now let me explain that for you just a moment. BPAs are blanket purchase agreements. And when we think about an open market BPA, we're talking about a procedure that is outlined in 13, all right? But if you have a blanket purchase agreement and you do utilize it from an open market perspective, you're limited to $13, all right? But if you do a schedule BPA, you use the format that is in 13 because that's the only place in FAR that it's located, if you will. All right, but you are only going to use schedule vendors and you are not limited to the $13. So the sky's the limit, so to speak, if you will, if you have a schedule BPA. And your BPA, whether it be single award or multiple award, is only going to have schedule vendors in that pool of vendors. I'll talk about that in the next session next door. All right, sealed bidding, no applicability to schedules. FAR Part 15, contracting by negotiation, no applicability to schedules. But I will say this. In the world of 14, sealed bidding, we award on low price, technically acceptable. In the world of 15, we award on best value. Now, schedules are at the user level awarded on best value. But there is some association, if you will, that in the commercial, of the buying of commercial product especially, that based upon salient characteristics of different manufacturers, that the best value is frequently the low price, technically acceptable. But best value is the methodology in the schedules world. FAR Part 19 deals with sealed bidding, and we say that 19 does not apply. Now somebody in the room is thinking, gosh, I know that you can do a small business set-aside now in the schedules program, and that is true. I'm talking about that tomorrow afternoon, all right, doing schedule set-asides, if you will. And that came about in November of 2011. But the deal is that the procedural part of 19 on doing set-asides is not applicable at schedules. And what 19 says is that if you're going to do a small business set-aside in the schedules world, what you use is 8.405 as the processes. And so the exception there says bundling. And bundling as a process, taking a number of smaller requirements and bundling together for a bigger one is allowable in the schedules world. And I would also say that the size standards that are outlined in FAR Part 19 is applicable under schedules if you're going to do a schedule set aside. And I would also say that the definitions of the socioeconomic categories that are found in 19 are applicable on the schedule side as well. But the processes of 19 is not. FAR Part 36 deals with construction and architectural and engineering services. And the reason that's not applicable to schedules is because there is no schedule for those. Now somebody here is thinking that, gosh, I had a requirement under Schedule 56 that had a little bit of construction work associated to it as an ancillary service. And so the truth of the matter is, in schedules, there is a capability of doing some minor construction as a part of another requirement, but not the major focus of the requirement, if you will. So an example that I could give you is that in recent years, in fact, within the last 18 months or so, FEMA has bought some extremely large generators. And the generators needed to be on a foundation. Well, the foundation was constituted really what would be construction work, but there is an ancillary service available so that the service for that requirement could be to set the pad for the generator to be on, all right? But that was ancillary to the purpose of the requirement and the dollars that were being spent, all right? And so when we talk about parts of FAR that is applicable to schedules, Part 7 and Part 10 are always going to be applicable to every requirement that you have in government, no matter what the vehicle is that you use. And when I say that it's always going to be required, because we do acquisition plans. And our acquisition plans are going to be commensurate to the requirement we have, the complexity of the requirement that we have, the dollar value of the requirement that we have. And so we're going to have an acquisition plan even with a scheduled buy. And then also market research. And so we're going to do market research because we're a government and that's the processes that we fulfill. But we're able in the schedules world to do market research through GSA e-tools, GSA Advantage, GSA e-library, GSA e-buy, all right? And so those are tools that we can use. In fact, there's a capability of using the e-tools to do your market research to make a determination of what you're going to buy, whether it's commercial or not. And if it is commercial, then the possibility of using schedules is there. But it doesn't mean it will always be the only do-all, win-all for your requirement. All right, interagency acquisitions is from 17.5, and there's a requirement that states that if you're going to use another agency's contract vehicle, your agency using my agency's vehicle, and your requirement is above $500,000, 500,000, you need to write a DNF to put in your contract file. It's not a complex type of scenario, it's just an element of constituting that your market research per se has shown that schedules is a viable option for you, okay? There is also an element in there for DoD people that says that you need to know that the senior procurement executive at GSA has posted a letter that says that for this FY, whatever FY we're in, that the schedules program complies with FAR. Well, the truth is that letter is posted and is available to you in DoD on the DPAP website. It's been there since October 1st. Also, protests. 33.1 deals with protests, and unfortunately, schedules can be protested, and they are. The most common protest that we see is where an agency physically mixes methodologies. You'll mix 8.4 methodologies with a 15 methodology, and then there's a confusion on the part of the contractors that are in the program in regards to how do they respond to you. And so we encourage that we speak terms of 8.4. We don't mix terminology that would be found in a FAR Part 15 procurement to make for any confusion, if you will. And so they can be protested. All right, but the volume of protests against schedules is really minimal when we think about the volume of schedule buys versus the volume of open market FAR 15 buys and the concept there. All right, 37.6 deals with performance-based contracting, and so GSA is encouraging every agency that buys services from or through the GSA Schedule program to use performance-based statements of work, where we tell the contractors what the end result is to be, and then physically what happens is that they give us a technical approach of how they would solve our requirement or meet our need. All right, and so if we were doing this under FAR 15, we would say, well, that's a technical proposal. Well, proposal is associated with a FAR 15 buy, RFPs, proposals being offers. In the world of schedules, we issue an RFQ, quotes being the information that a contractor gives us. So just using a terminology of a technical approach kind of puts us in a different arena than we would be in 15. 39 deals with the acquisition of information technology. Schedule 70 is one of the largest schedules that GSA have. There is over 5,000 vendors on that schedule alone. GSA also has the GWAX program within the Federal Acquisition Service, which is IT product and service. We also have in the global supply program, the warehousing program that we have, we also have IT product there. So 39 is applicable to multiple elements when it comes to GSA. All right, when we talk about the benefits, I like to compare a schedule buy, which would be above $150,000, to that of a FAR 15 buy, just to give you something to think about. In a 15 is very, very regimented in regards to processes, and there's the formation of the Source Selection Evaluation Board, the SSEB, where there's going to be a Source Selection Authority, an SSA. There's going to be members of other cadres of government, meaning not only contracting, but technical and legal and so forth. And so you would have this Source Selection Evaluation Board in a major buy under 15. In the world of schedules, that's not required. There's nothing in 8.4 about using an SSEB. Now, I don't know of anything that keeps you from doing it if you would want to. I just don't know why you would want to tell you the truth, because of the complexity of it and the time consumption that it does. Also, you're going to issue a solicitation unless you take an exception to SECA, one of the 7 exceptions that's physically in FAR Part 6. Unless you're going to take an exception to SECA, you're going to have your solicitation posted for a minimum of 30 days. And the truth of the matter is, most solicitations in schedules are posted between 10 and 15 days, all right, using GSA eBuy as the RFQ tool, or your agency portal, whatever suits best for you. All right, and so that's the average. Now there is, under GSA eBuy, the RFQ tool, you have the capability of posting a requirement for as short as 48 hours. As short as 48 hours. That's not the norm. But in a world of necessity, you have that capability. And then again, we spoke about the element here that there's no synopsis in FedBizOps. So think about that. FedBizOps synopsis, a couple of weeks, 30 days based on SECA for FAR 15. You could have already bought this item by posting your requirement for 10 to 15 days in GSA eBuy and doing your evaluation, making your award from an already awarded contract vehicle that is in place. Because that contract vehicle already has what you would know as reps and certs, contractors already pre-qualified to receive an award from the government. If you're awarding to a business who's other than small, there is a small business subcontracting plan already at the contract level for your availability. All right, and so you're either in the program or not. That one bullet that says that you don't, conducting competition by seeking contractors outside the Schedules program. Your market research would have said, well, Schedules is viable. I see that it's good. I've made the decision. My acquisition plan is set. And so you're either in or you're out. You don't do both types of solicitation, being open market and also Schedules at the same time. All right. The element of conducting discussions. 15 is very clear on the difference in discussions and clarifications. In the world of Schedules, we do have open communication with our vendors. You have the capability at the user level to have communications with our vendors and so forth during the solicitation period. You don't conduct formal debriefings or competitive ranges, but you do something similar. Well, you understand that you can have a pre and post debrief in the world of FAR 15. In the world of Schedules, if a schedule vendor is not successful in winning the award and seeks to have information after the award is made, you don't debrief them, you give them feedback. Well, Tommy, what's the difference in feedback and debriefing? Nothing. All right, now I say that, and I say that with a little tongue in cheek, because physically speaking, the feedback you can give a vendor is the same as it would be with a debrief. You're going to use the vendor's quote compared to the evaluation factors, and then you're physically going to, if you will, not use the winner's quote, nor are you going to use any of the other unsuccessful's quote. This is just between this vendor who wants feedback and the government, if you will. The biggest thing about the feedback that we give is that it can be done informally. It doesn't have to be a formal debrief session. It can be done even through a telephone call, all right? And competitive range, you understand a competitive range. We got 15 proposals in, we evaluated them all, and these 3, these 4, these 5 have the most reasonable expectation of winning the award. In Schedules, you got 15 quotes in, these 3, these 4, these 5 have the most reasonable expectation of winning the award. And so that's my down select. Different term, just about the same processes, and I'm going to now use those to concentrate my final selection, if you will, all right? And so, there are similarities, if you will, but we use different terms and the processes are just a tad bit different. All right, so when we speak about that aspect, we're either in the program or we're not, and then we don't synopsize. Now, that concept of the sole source greater than simplified acquisition in LSJ is found in 8.405G. But for those that need to know something in addition to that in regards to not synopsizing, in FAR Part 5, there is an element here that you have an exception, if you will, to synopsizing if this is from a procurement that has already been synopsized. Now think about it. You're on the user level, all right? At the contract level, it was synopsized in FedBizOps. So it gives you an exception to there, all right? Ordering procedures. Listen, the ordering procedures are broken out into either for supply items and services that don't require a statement of work versus services that do require a statement of work. So 8.405-1 are those supplies and then services that don't require a statement of work. And if you're under micro threshold of $3,500, you're just going to select a contractor. Now it says there to distribute amongst the contractors. So if you have a number of requirements, they may not even be the same, but they would be off the same schedule. You would really want to rotate and not give the appearance of an impropriety that you're using the same vendor over and over. If you're above micro, 3,500, but under simplified acquisition, 150,000, you survey at least 3 contractors. A survey, all right, you can do a telephone survey, an email survey, you can use different methodologies to be able to survey vendors. Your goal is to get 3 quotes, all right? And so you can use a limited source justification Meaning, in the world of schedules, if you're DOD, you're familiar when I say J&A, what a justification and approval is. You're taking an exception to SECA. If you're a civilian agency, you normally use a JOFOC, justification for other than full and open competition. Same document, just different acronym. All right, but you're taking an exception to SECA. In the world of schedules, if you physically, at the order level, want to take an exception and restrict the competition and physically have a sole source or a brand name buy, you can do it with something called the LSJ, the limited source justification. It is not a J&A, it is not a JOFOC. It is a document that is outlined in, if you will, FAR 8.4, 406 to be exact, that is allowance of this concept of limiting sources in the schedules program. There are 3 circumstances where that's allowed. All right, that's a whole other class in and of itself. All right, so LSJ, if it's applicable, determine if a price reduction is sought. Determine because it's not mandated because you're under 150. All right, best value determination, make your award. But if you're above simplified acquisition, you do develop an RFQ, a request for quote. And then your goal is to get 3 quotes. And it has a statement there. It says use of e-buy meets fair notice, if you will. All right, and so what we're speaking about there physically is that if you use any method of solicitation other than GSA e-buy and you don't get 3 quotes, you're going to have to resolicit or use another methodology or include or widen your range of vendors under that particular schedule. All right, because if you're not using e-buy, you have to have 3 quotes above 150. All right, but if you do use e-buy as your methodology and you only get 1 quote, or you get 2, and from those 2, you can find one of them viable for an award, e-buy meets fair notice. And how that works is that, let's say, for example, you're looking at a schedule that's got a number of special item numbers under it, and that under this particular SIN or special item number, there's 300 vendors. And so you selected a dozen or 15 or so, and you sent that that RFQ out. And then you didn't get 3 quotes, but you got a couple, and from the couple, you can make an award, all right? But the other vendors, the vendors that you did not include in the solicitation, have the capability of seeing it if they look, all right? And so that's how the FAR says, if you will, that fair notice has been met because all the vendors under that particular schedule and SIN will have the capability of seeing it if they look, even though they didn't get the email through the GSA e-buy system because you didn't select them. LSJ, if it's applicable, seek a price reduction because you're above 150. And then, if you will, you can't place these orders orally where you could in the other methodologies. And you're going to be doing this based on best value. Now, under -2, 405-2, we're talking about services with a statement of work. Same set of rules apply below micro. Pick a vendor, do your market research, and then place an order. If you're above micro but under simplified acquisition, you do create a statement of work. And that statement of work needs to have evaluation criteria. And so you're going to issue the RFQ to at least 3, hopefully more. LSJ, if it's applicable, you're going to distribute it amongst the vendors and make a best value determination. But once you get above simplified acquisition threshold, you do have an RFQ with evaluation criteria. The same rule applies with the e-buy concept, if you will. LSJ, if it's applicable, you seek a price reduction because you're above 150. You make a best value determination, but there's an element here of overall price reasonableness based upon the considering of the mix of labor and the levels of effort. And so when you're thinking about a service that's going to have different labor categories, and so those labor categories are going to be expressed back in the quote with a level of effort to each one. And most likely, those labor categories are going to have various rates. So the multiplier of the number of hours the vendor feels is necessary to meet this requirement that the agency has is going to be multiplied out to get a final price. And so the government has an independent estimate, if you will, based upon what the government feels that the categories of labor, how much level of effort is required. So when you are using them, you need to do an analysis of making certain that you and the government's perception of the level of effort and the various labor categories is in tune with the quotes that you're receiving from the vendors. And you can look at the vendors and see their various quotes that come in and see if the government is in line with what the contracting community or the contractor community is actually thinking, if you will. All right, and so when we talk about these schedules, there's over 40 million items in there, 40 million supply and services available through the schedules program. And there's 39, we already spoke about that, 9 of them being managed by the VA. There's over 17,000 contractors that are in this program, if you will. 80% are deemed to be small business of some socioeconomic category. And of course, we can do small business set-asides and BPA set-asides in the schedules program now, which we'll talk about tomorrow. But this is a $40+ billion program. At one point, a few years ago, it was an over a $50 billion program, but the war effort was strong, and physically speaking, where government spending is down just a little bit. But when you think about it, it is about 20% of all IDIQ contracting in the world of government. About half of what the government spends in a year, about $250 billion, is done through IDIQs. And so this program constitutes about 20% of that, if you will. All right, and so you can buy all sorts of services. Most all of the services are actually awarded through an acquisition center that GSA manages out of Auburn, Washington. And so they are the service experts, if you will. And so these are just a few, and the list can be found on GSA eLibrary. And then there's other acquisition centers that are represented by these particular categories, if you will. Office supplies and equipment is in New York. Tools and hardware in Kansas City. Vehicles and IT is in Washington, D.C. When we speak about furniture, that's in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And so they are centers of excellence when it comes to the type of procurements that they handle, that they award at the scheduled contract level. And so we have expertise in those arenas. But let's talk about using schedules, using these vehicles in a contractor team arrangement. And when we talk about contractor team arrangements or contractor teaming, many people's minds who are familiar with FAR immediately go to FAR Part 9. FAR Part 9 deals with qualifying of a contractor to be able to do business with the government. And in 9.6, subpart 9.6, there is a description, if you will, of teaming. It talks about this element of a new entity. You know, it talks about, a joint venture. It talks about businesses coming together to join hands to become one to give a solution, if you will, to the government. And so there's some key characteristics in that regard, and some of that even regards a partnership or a limited liability, a corporation setup of those businesses. And so, you know, they could be large businesses alone, they could be small businesses alone, they could be small and large that are forming this relationship as described by 9.6 of the FAR. But that's not what I'm talking about. That is not it at all. This is a processes that is not a part of FAR Part 9. It is only towards schedules. It is not even described in 8.4, but it is commonly used in a capability of meeting a total solution. And when I say a total solution, it's easy for us to think about, gosh, I've got a supply item. I do my market research. This schedule meets my need. I've got a service requirement, and this schedule meets my particular need. But when I do my market research and I have a requirement that is commercial by nature, but I can't find a single schedule to meet that need, and my thought process goes to, if I could just get one schedule off of Schedule A, another off of B, and possibly one off of C, and they do their portion of the work because the work is identifiable in such a fashion, then I could have a schedule buy, take advantage of the shorter solicitation time, use an already established contract vehicle that's meant for all of government to use, and meet my need. And so in a concept, GSA says we have supplies, we have services, and we provide solutions. And so this is another way that we do solutions, if you will. Because if you see that as a government user, as a government contracting professional, you have the capability to literally issue your solicitation that way. And you can issue it so that you can get a team approach to your requirement, okay? But there comes some elements that you need to know. You need to know from these vendors. Now, we're not talking about a prime and sub relationship. We're talking about a situation where each team member physically is got a responsible element of the requirement. And physically speaking, you are going to know how much work that team member is going to do. You're going to know how much level of effort that you're going to be paying for and what the cost is going to be for each team member. And the more important part about this is that you're going to have privity with each one of those team members. And so that differs when we talk about prime and sub, in that when we have a prime who hires a subs, physically speaking, we have no privity with the subs. And we're basing our award on the prime's rates that are going to be negotiated, and we don't even think about what the sub's rates are because the prime is paying the sub. But in the concept of teaming, if you will, under schedules, each individual schedule holder, and they each have to have their own schedule, each individual schedule holder's rates is the baseline for the negotiation for their part of the work that is being done. All right? And so the roles and responsibilities are defined for each team, and it is documented in what we call a team arrangement. Now the truth is that the vendors put that together. All right, it's not a document that the government puts together in regards for them to answer to. And so, when we speak about the concept of the benefit, it gives a total solution to the government. It could very well give you multiple small businesses for a total solution where the solution would be of such a magnitude that you may not get a small business from a perspective of a single awardee. And so it does increase competition from that perspective. And then the contractors see a benefit as well, but we're focusing on the supplies and services that best match what they do under their particular schedule, in addition to multiple schedules, if you will. And so it kind of levels that playing field for small businesses. I spoke not just recently at a small business event, and I encourage them to find a team, if they were a schedule holder, to find a team member, a competitor who was also on the GSA schedule that they were on, so that possibly as a team they could give a response to a requirement that would be of such a magnitude that neither one of them could do independently, if you will. All right, and so it does reduce risk. I had a recent situation where there was 3 vendors on a team arrangement. 2 of them were performing superbly. The third one was a little bit shaky, if you know what I mean, all right? And so the other 2 made sure that number 3 got his act together. And so it wasn't even up to the government. We recognized there was an issue, and when we started showing concern, boy, the other 2 jumped right in to be certain that everything was going to be successful, even though in a team arrangement, it is possible with 3 team members that 2 could pass and 1 would fail. But that's not normal in that regard, all right? And so when we talk about this legal relationship that's going to be between these team members, whether there's 2 team members or 3 team members or 4 team members, that each of them have their own schedule, remember, they're going to have to write their relationship, their business relationship with each other, and submit it as a part of their team quote. Now, on this circle of things that could possibly be within the relationship, the legal relationship, agreement duration, delivery responsibility, list of open market items, terms, and so forth, you can see that there's a number of things there that are 3. But gosh, they could apply, as could these. Each requirement's going to be different. The team arrangement between the vendors is going to constitute what is important to the government in regards to meeting this need. So performance evaluation, specific team activities, independent contractors, all of the identification of the parties, just some more things that could be in the team arrangement if they were applicable. And then, of course, there could be these. All right, last slide on these things, okay? All right, but the element is that every requirement stands on its own. And so when we're talking about the team arrangement that's going to come to the government as a part of the quote, the contractors need to include, based on the requirement in and of itself, any applicable aspect that the government may have question about. And so, if a warranty is applicable, you need to address how you would handle it, because there's more of you than one. And, any liabilities and so forth and so on. How are you going to report your sales and your IFF to us and that sort of thing? We just questions to validate that we can understand how you're operating within your team arrangement with each other. All right, and when we talk about this aspect, when we talk about that teaming and subcontracting, I kind of alluded to this earlier where, only the team members are the folks that are physically, you have privity with. But that doesn't mean that team members can't have subs. So in the team member having a sub, you have privity with the member, but not with their subs. Even if their sub happens to have their own schedule, if they're not identified as a team member, they're only functioning as a sub, the applicability of privity is not there. All right, but there's going to be a team lead. That's part of the agreement that we want to see from the vendors when they submit that to us as a part of their quote package. And so the team lead is going to be the immediate interface in regards to who talks to the government. And so the team lead may or may not do a predominance of the work. There's been an interim rule. There is right now there's some underlying case, if you will, that came about just a couple of years ago. And you know how it is with cases in government and FAR cases and so on and so forth. OFPP, the Office of Federal Procurement Policy, GSA legal staff, and GSA Office of Government-Wide Policy is involved with this right now. We're putting together, and it's going to be a little time before there will be eventually procedures in the FAR on teaming, all right, in the schedules teaming. But as an interim rule, right now, it is stated that whoever receives the predominance of the funding, whoever does the work of a volume that gets the most money out of this team arrangement, they're going to be the vendor that is to be placed in FPDS. All right. Currently, you can only load one awardee into FPDS. There's other places to put other vendors that participated, but one awardee per se. So to keep there to being an appearance that somebody did a whole lot more work than they may have done, rather than the norm in the past being that the team lead was placed in FPDS, you're now placing the team member that does the predominance of the work, and that may or may not be the team lead. All right. All right, and so when we talk about that, and we talk about a difference in a contractor team arrangement versus a prime and sub, who's got to hold the scheduled contract? Everybody, each member in the CTA, where only the prime does in a prime and sub. Who's considered a party for privity? Each team member under CTA, only the prime and a prime and sub. Who has ultimate responsibility for duties? Each member. And so there is a performance element for each member, if you will. Only the prime and a prime and sub. And what are the rates? All right, if you think about it, under schedules, every vendor has their own rate that's been negotiated at the schedule level. And then you're going to be able to negotiate that rate for the work that's being done at the task or delivery order level. So under this team arrangement, you are able to take each team member's base rate and negotiate from there. They're going to give you a quote off of that base rate. And most likely it's going to be already discounted, but you're able to negotiate each team member independently. Remember, you've got privity with them, all right? And so under the prime and sub, we're only dealing with the prime's rates, and they're going to reimburse or pay their subs for the work that they do. And so the prime's work may be at a lower rate, or it may be of a work effort that is not as prominent in regards to what the prime actually charges for the work that they do. And so physically speaking, there is an opportunity for a cost savings when we're using contractor team arrangements. And so here's where we say, this is another methodology in GSA to get a total solution using contractors from different schedules. It is a uniqueness in and of itself, and a capability within the schedules program. So when we start talking about establishing that, this slide is written as if it were two contractors. But physically speaking, if you think about it, to establish a contractor team arrangement, the contractors need to understand what this whole solicitation is saying to them. Now, from the government perspective, when we issue a GSA schedule RFQ, physically we will identify that this is going to be a schedule buy, and that it's off of schedule so-and-so, and it is covering SINs or special item numbers such and such under that particular schedule. So if our intention is to do a team arrangement using vendors off of different schedules, when we issue the RFQ, we would list all of the schedule and the appropriate special item numbers from that schedule within the RFQ and give the indication by saying that the government will encounter or will allow for team quotes to come in. All right, and so we're encouraging the vendors, if you will, to use GSA tools like eLibrary to go to those other schedules and find vendors that are on that other schedule that could possibly team with them to be a vendor. Now, this is if we're anticipating to use multiple schedules. But as I alluded earlier, it is possible for vendors on the same schedule, maybe small businesses per se, to team with another small business to give a package to the government for a single requirement under one schedule, one SIN, that is of a magnitude that they couldn't do independently. But they could do it if they had some help. And so they divide the work. They each become physically responsible for a portion. There's privity with the government, with each vendor that's playing under this scenario. And they submit as a part of their quote that the government didn't even ask for, a team document saying that this is how they're going to function as a team to give the solution to the government that the government's seeking, if you will. All right, and so it is an element there for the capability of vendors as well as for government users. And so when we establish it, we're going to establish in advance any known requirement. This is where we're going to issue the RFQ, identifying the schedules, if we will. And so we're going to do that, and so the vendors will know how to respond. They're going to create, the contractors are going to create their document, which is their business agreement with one another, and then that's going to be submitted as a part of the quote. I believe I mentioned that earlier, if you will. And it's going to identify all the elements that is necessary that the government needs to know. Now, in a team arrangement, it is not unusual for the government to say we need to know the team members, the contracts, and so forth and so on. But we don't write that agreement. The government does not write this agreement. That agreement comes from the vendors themselves as a part of their quote. And so the communication, this is one of the things I've emphasized all along since we've been talking, that CTAs are going to have points of outline for each team member. Each team member is going to identify their function of the work and how they're going to meet their portion of the solution. And we have that element of privity with each team member, so we can have communication at the pre-award level with each one of those participators, if you will. And it could be, maybe the concept between the team members is that they don't want to talk to the government independently, that they want their team lead to do it. It's up to them, and then the government will decide if that's appropriate for us or not. All right, and so there are some responsibilities on the part of the ordering activity, if you will, to gain an understanding and fully understand how the vendors are going to work together, as a team. And look at the elements of responsibility. And we have to look at what contractor A, B, and C are doing, and does the total of each of those levels of effort meet our total solution, if you will. Look at some deficiencies. Do we, the government, see some deficiencies because of this contractor team arrangement, in that regard? And maybe it will create questions for us that need to be addressed. And then we could also look at to verify the proposed units of pricing and the hourly rates against the scheduled contracts for each one of the members. Remember, they cannot charge any more than what their schedule awarded hourly rates would be or their scheduled price would be if this was for a product. And so we want to make certain that if they include additional terms and conditions, or if your agency wants to include terms and conditions at the order level, that they don't conflict with the GSA terms and conditions at the contract level. This is true in team arrangements. This is true in straight up task and delivery orders. That a federal agency using schedules can include terms and conditions at the order level that may not be in the contract at the schedule level. All right? But your agency terms and conditions or your activities terms and conditions cannot conflict with ours. As long as they don't conflict with ours, you have a capability of including terms and conditions at the order level. All right, and so when we speak about that, we're validating that the CTA meets all the conditions that are specified in the RFQ. And we're going to, we're going to see the identifying of each of the vendors and who's going to be the lead. And we're going to know that whoever receives the predominance of the funds that we're going to spend on this requirement is the vendor that's going to be identified in FPDS. All right, when we talk about this concept of the team of CTAs and reporting, the element here of FPDS NG, new generation, if you will, the total order value is going to be addressed, but there's going to obviously be some concept with knowing how the industrial funding fee is going to be dispersed or paid to GSA from each of those participators. I did mention earlier that GSA is working with OFPP and the Small Business Administration to issue some final guidance on this so that it can be in the regulations and so forth. And so there's going to be an element in the CTA as to who's going to do the invoicing. Now there's a capability. I'm asked this on a regular basis. Can each individual vendor that's a part of the team arrangement invoice the government separately? I guess they can. Nothing against that. But we, the government, would much prefer that we receive a single invoice, make a single payment, and then the individual team lead would disperse the payments to the other team members. Makes it so much easier for us in that regard to paying the contractors that are participating. And so they're going to report their sales independently, if you will. When it comes to the administration of it, the ordering activity administers it, if you will, as they would any other multiple award schedule order. And you're going to do inspection and acceptance that would be applicable for this requirement that you have. Is it possible that you could even have a contracting officer's representative that would be monitoring the contractors? There is remedies that we need to include in the end result in case there should be some type of failure to deliver in some regards. That could include termination for cause. And also we're going to include termination for convenience because that's a part of the contract at the schedule level. All right, and so we talk about final decisions and disputes that arise. We want to understand how we're going to handle any of those that cannot relate to the terms and conditions that are already there. So that's a part of the teaming arrangement that we would look for from the contractors. All right. And dealing with problems, each team member is responsible for their portion, if you will. CTA is going to identify which team member is responsible in that regard. And, any non-performance, if you will, is going to be based upon the inspection and acceptance clauses at the contract level and, of course, the termination clauses. All right, so we got off to a little rocky start with a slideshow, but we have made it through. And so I'm hoping that you got a general understanding of schedules and how they actually operate, and that you see that this team arrangement is a uniqueness. It is not as described in FAR 9.6, but it is unique to schedules in and of itself, and that you can see how you can establish them, if you will. And so that's going to bring us to a close. This slide deck, when you do see it, if you download it from the portal that's going to be provided for all the presentations that are a part of today and tomorrow, it also has some web resources in there. And there's a sample BPA format that's actually available there and so forth. And we have some additional web resources, if you will, in regards to student guides for this topic and all the other topics that I'm talking about that are downloadable as a PDF. And then we give the Office of Acquisition Management and the training division within it does give training twice a month by webinar. That's open to contractors as well as to government people. No cost, contains CLP credit. And we also have 14 topics up on the DAU portal that are GSA related, including not only schedule topics, but we also have GWACs and global supply and e-buy and reverse auctions that give CLP credit as well. There is a document that's known as the Multiple Award Schedules Desk Reference, and that's available for order, if you will, through GSA CMLS in Chicago. The current version that's on the shelf is version 6. Hopefully within the next 60 days, we're going to have version 7 available. And so we always keep the most recent version up on the portal, set up as a flip book, if you will. So that's it. I hope there's been some enlightenment today on a topic that's not even within the regulations at the time being. Thank you for your attendance. All right.